Come to the place where abundant lives abide. Come to the place where you will find new life.
The revolution will not be televised is a poem and song sung by Gil ScottHeron, recorded in 1970. In an interview, ScottHeron said of the song, that song was about your mind. You have to change your mind before you change the way you live and the way you move. The thing that's going to change people will be something that no one will be able to capture on film. It will just be something you see, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm on the wrong page. I do believe that if Jesus had chosen a theme for these two parables, he would have chosen that theme, the revolution would not be televised. Do you realize how dependent we've become on television? And now that we have cable and 24-hour news, it just never stops. And most of us keep the televisions on in our homes constantly. They're babysitters for our children. They keep us company if we feel lonely. Commercials tell us that we can buy shampoo or drive a certain car, wear a certain cologne, drink a certain liquor, and we'll become the sexiest people in the world. And everybody will almost pass out when we walk by. But this young man tapped into something. And Jesus always says at first that something is happening in the world that's not being captured by the media frenzy. It's not on cable network news. It's not on CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS. It's not on ESPN. Something is happening that the Picayune and the Advocate and Time and Ebony, they're not even writing about it. God is doing something in the earth. Dare I use the word surreptitiously, undercover, not noticeable. But only until it happens do you realize it was happening. It's happening all the time, but until it happens, you didn't even see it coming. God has a revolution. Will not be televised. Listen to what he said. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who plants a seed. Now, you plant a seed, a strange thing happens. You have to put it in the ground out of sight. You have to put it somewhere where you're not going to see it again. I don't know anything about horticulture, but they tell me that the seed actually dies. And the warm earth pulls off the outer shell. And that seed germinates, and then against everything that's against it, here is a little seed down in heavy earth. But that seed down in heavy earth pushes its way up until its head peeks through the soil. And then what was a very small seed can become a great big tree. You didn't see it. And that's why many of you, your faith doesn't work because first you've got to plant it in something that doesn't make sense. And many of us are like I was when I was a child. I remember in our backyard in Pensacola, I planted some watermelon seeds and they grew, but I dug them up because I thought in 2 or 3 days I'd have watermelons. I didn't realize that there's a process. But it's an invisible process. It's a waiting process. But faith is knowing I planted the seed. Now I've got to step back and trust the invisible activity of God that's not being televised. It doesn't look like I'm being blessed because it's not televised. It doesn't look like I'm getting anywhere because it's not televised. It doesn't look like the church is moving ahead. It doesn't look like the kingdom, but it's growing, although you can't see it. A woman got some bread and put some yeast in it, and she put the yeast in the bread. Didn't look like anything at first, but that yeast began to grow and expand, and it penetrated every area of that bread, and before you knew it, what started off small and insignificant, it began to take on broader dimensions. So I've come today, actually on this Communion Sunday, to encourage you not to get discouraged by what you don't see. But I'm trying to get you to trust God, although you don't see a thing. But I promise you, He's at work. And I want you to know, and that's where a lot of you all get in trouble, because people who walk by sight have the audacity to say to you, I don't see anything. But you know you planted a seed. You know you've trusted in God. And if you're in the kingdom today and you don't see anything, trust me, it's growing. It's out of sight, but it's growing. It's beyond the perception of the natural eye, but it's growing. It's beyond the reach of scientific empirical information, but it's growing. It's beyond the perusal of great intellectual geniuses, but I'm telling you, it's growing anyhow. If you just hold on. That's what I want you to do. Just hold on. Just hold on. And as I close, yes, I mean close. I'm coming to a close. I want you to look out of the scripture, if you will, into the historical application. I want to bring you to history to prove this discourse, because it seems to me this truth set down by Jesus was so set forth in historical perspective. I just couldn't ignore it. I thought about it. I said, now look at the facts. Come on, look at the facts. A peripatetic, that means walking around, Jewish carpenter got executed by the state on a cross outside of Jerusalem 2,100 years ago. But they made the mistake because, first of all, they lifted him up. And the second mistake is they buried him. They should not have buried him. Because when they buried him, unless a corn of wheat falls into the ground and dies. But while he was in the ground, a growing process started. So he got up from the grave 3 days later. Now the Bible said there were only 120 in the upper room. But as of the 6th day of October 2013, you do the math. Now in Europe, they finished calling his name because right now it's about 12 or 1 o'clock in Europe. So they're calling his name now at 11 o'clock in Europe. We're calling his name at 8:30 in America. And a few hours later in China, they're calling his name. Tell me, how did the seed go from a little man on a cross in Jerusalem, but now they're singing all hail the power of Jesus' name all over the world? All the revolution won't be televised. He had 12 disciples, but actually ended up with 11 because one committed suicide. And wasn't but one at the cross when he died. You don't need a big company if God is with you. And then when Christianity began to grow into the Roman Empire, at first, Dad says, at first they smirked at the gospel. And then they frowned at the gospel. And then they turned their fists against the gospel. And Nero and Caligula and Domitian did everything they could to stamp out the church. They put the church in the Colosseum to be eaten by lions. They impaled the church on crosses. They burned the church in hot oil. They exiled the church to islands. They put the church in prison. But by the 3rd century AD, Constantine had a vision and saw a cross, and the whole Roman Empire bowed its knee to that same message they tried to stamp out. All the revolution won't be televised. Blacks came to this country by 1619. And I'm not going to talk about the Middle Passage, the church bombings, the rapings, the murders, the abuse. But I want to tell you this. Since the 1780s, America couldn't decide what to do with us and whether or not slavery would be allowed in expanding territories. But in 1857, a man named Dred Scott was the slave of a doctor who took him to live in a free state. So Brother Scott took his case to the Supreme Court, saying, since I live in a free state, I ought to be a free man. But the Dred Scott decision of 1857 said that African Americans were not citizens of the United States. Ergo, they had no rights to sue. As a matter of fact, they had no rights at all. Fast forward to 1896. In Bogalusa, Sawmill Town, a man named Plessy tried to sit on a train in the white section. It ended up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided separate but equal is the law. And they attached segregation in Jim Crow America until the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And so, but today, if you happen to be on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, if you stand outside the gate, a black man and his black wife and his 2 black daughters and his black mother-in-law is living in the White House. All the revolution won't be televised. Adolf Hitler, with his goose-stepping soldiers and his blitzkrieg, retraced the map of Eastern Europe, started a war that involved the whole world. He was, in 1933, he was invincible. In April of 1945, he shot himself in his own bunker underneath the ground in Berlin. Oh, the revolution. In 1917, the Bolsheviks took over Russia and instituted communism, therefore giving birth to the Soviet Union. But in my lifetime, the Soviet Union broke up, releasing those 12 nations to become independent, and communism is now dead in Russia. After World War II, 4 different nations took a part of Berlin, allowing it to be controlled by 4 different groups. But the communists, recognizing things were not going well, split Berlin into 2 parts. West Berlin belonged to democracy. East Berlin belonged to the communists, because so many people were going to West Berlin. But in my lifetime, the Berlin Wall in 1989 came tumbling down. God is at work whether you see it or not. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island in prison simply for fighting for his freedom. But the last time I saw Nelson Mandela, he walked out of prison and became the president of South Africa. Let me tell you something. I dare you to believe that God is at work. You can't see it. You can't put your finger on it. But as sure as I'm standing here, I'm telling you, God is at work. He may not make a lot of noise. He may not say much about it. But God's will, God's way, God's purpose, God's plan will come to pass. He does it quietly. He does it unobtrusively. He does it silently. Truth forever on the scaffold. Wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. And there standeth God in the dim unknown, keeping watch o'er his own. I wish he'd be more boisterous. I do. I wish he'd make more noise and walk with heavy feet and shake stuff up. But I noticed something. He lets the devil always have the first inning. Sometimes the second inning. Sometimes all 3 or 4, 5 innings. But I'm telling you, in the 9th inning. And I don't know what you're going through this morning. I don't know what you're facing this morning. But I want to give you some advice. Hold on. Trust the Lord. Keep your faith. Don't give up. I wish I could sing like Karen and Lisi and Fred Hammond. Really, I wish I could sing like Nat King Cole. I wish I could sing like Sam Cooke. But I can't. So you may ask, well, Pastor, since you don't have that great a voice, and I don't remember the last time somebody asked me to sing a song. Why do you sing? I'll tell you. I'll tell you why I sing. It's not because I think it's so melodic, or I don't know whether you like me singing or not. I never ask you. Notice I never ask you. As a reason. But I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow. And I know he watches me. God is doing something in the earth, in you, and in this church that's not being televised. But when it comes to pass, the whole world will see it.